The chandeliers glittered above Grand Aurora Hall, their crystal facets scattering light brighter than any moon that might have shone outside. The ballroom was a kingdom of glass and gold that evening, a place where wealth dressed itself in silk gowns and black tie jackets, where every note of the jazz ensemble seemed choreographed to reassure the powerful that the world was theirs. Guests mingled in polished shoes across the marble floors, lifting glasses of Cabernet and Pinot Noir, savoring slices of roast beef served pink at the center. To them, this charity gala was as routine as breathing, another evening to display generosity in public while quietly measuring social standing. Evelyn Hart moved quietly through the glow, a tray balanced on her arm with the ease of long practice. Rows of champagne flutes caught the light as she passed between tables. The posture she carried had been drilled into her by years of music training she no longer had the privilege to pursue. There had once been a time when she stood at the front of a church choir, her voice lifting toward vaulted ceilings, filling stained glass windows with warmth. Now her voice was silent, replaced by the clink of glasses and the rustle of napkins. Her manager, Margaret Doyle, had offered her the same reminder she always gave before these events. Head up, Evelyn. These people can smell nerves. Be invisible, efficient, and polite. Margaret's voice, firm but not unkind, had echoed in Evelyn's head as she stepped into the grand hall. She obeyed, moving like a shadow among the peacocks. The men with cufflinks and the women with diamond bracelets barely noticed her. That was part of the uniform. Black and white, crisp and starched, designed to erase the person inside. The aroma of food mingled with perfume and cologne. Roast beef carved onto porcelain plates. Fresh bread brushed with butter, warm enough that steam rose when torn. A velvety sauce laced with red wine pooled beneath the meat, a flourish that made the simplest dish appear decadent. Waiters like Evelyn moved with precision to replenish glasses with burgundy reds or crisp whites. She kept her eyes low, but her ears caught the hum of conversation. Laughter rang a pitch too high, whispers curved like daggers hidden in velvet. As she leaned to refill a glass, a fragment of talk reached her. A man at a corner table, voice low but weighted with authority, spoke the name Kane Corporation. Evelyn's hands stilled for a fraction of a second, her grip tightening on the neck of the bottle. The sound of that name was an echo from another life, the corporation that had once collapsed her father's small business, leaving debts, illness, and silence where music used to live. She forced herself to pour steadily, to nod politely as though the name meant nothing. Inside, her chest tightened, a wound she thought had scarred over flaring awake. She set the bottle back onto her tray and inhaled, steadying herself. The jazz ensemble drifted into a swinging tune, brass bright and piano chords playful, as if mocking her turmoil. She lifted her tray again, weaving past gowns the color of emeralds and midnight. Margaret watched her from near the service doors, lips pressed thin, a subtle reminder, do not draw attention. Evelyn adjusted her posture, remembering that her job tonight was not to feel, but to serve. Still, the hall pressed down on her. The walls seemed to hum with the weight of money, with the unspoken belief that everyone here mattered more than the ones carrying plates and clearing glasses. She caught her reflection in a gilded mirror as she passed. For a moment she imagined herself not in uniform but in a dress of deep blue satin, standing before a microphone, a spotlight warm on her skin. The fantasy faded as quickly as it came when a guest brushed past without apology, nearly colliding with her tray. She murmured an apology out of reflex, though she had not been at fault. She carried the glasses toward another cluster of guests, but this time she felt it, an unmistakable gaze fixed on her. It was not the casual glance of someone checking a server's presence. This was sharper, deliberate, dissecting. She looked up, against her better judgment. Across the room, at a table near the center where the wealthiest and loudest gathered, a young man reclined with effortless arrogance. His cufflinks gleamed. His smile was the kind that lived on inherited confidence. His eyes lingered on her, pale and cold, the look of someone studying, not a person, but a curiosity. Evelyn's breath caught. She lowered her gaze at once, retreating into the comfort of her professional mask. Yet even as she stepped back toward the shadows, she felt it, that unblinking attention following her, like a searchlight cutting across a darkened stage. It was the beginning of something she could not yet name, but her body knew instinctively. This gaze would not simply pass over her. And so, as the orchestra swelled and laughter rose like champagne bubbles, the evening shifted. The name Kane still rang in her ears, and now the heir himself had set his eyes upon her. The night had only begun, and already the air carried the sharp edge of fate closing in. Some looks are not meant to see you. They are meant to place you. The one that fastened on Evelyn from the center table had that purpose, cool as a draft from an open door, unblinking as cut glass. The VIP table sat under a chandelier that threw flecks of light onto silverware and stemware like confetti that never fell. Champagne chimed in flutes, the air scented with citrus and a buttery note that could have been brioche or simply the comfort of money. Clara Vance sat there in a column of pearl silk, laughing in neat, tinkling bursts that asked nothing and offered even less. Beside her lounged Lawrence Kane Jr., jacket open as if every room existed for his comfort. Troy and Damien bracketed him like bookends, their smiles trained to mirror his. Evelyn approached with a bottle raised slightly, the practiced angle that allowed guests to see the label without breaking her stride. She could feel the look before she met it again. Lawrence's attention, idle and predatory, the way a boy might watch a firefly in a jar, deciding when to shake it. "Here she is," Clara said, as if unveiling a centerpiece, the little comet from the service corridor. Evelyn tipped the bottle, catching the light on the green glass. "Would you like a refill, ma'am?" Eyes sliding over Evelyn's face, down to the black and white uniform that erased it. "Top me off, sweetheart." Implanted watched the pour, the slow rise of bubbles, the pale thread of foam. "Every glass exactly the same," he murmured, loud enough for the table. "It's almost mechanical." "Thanks," Troy chuckled. Damien chefed half a note higher. The band on the far side of the room slipped into a bright standard, trumpet mellow, brushes whispering on the snare. Evelyn kept the bottle steady. The trick was to make the stream thin, to avoid the froth that looked showy to some and sloppy to others. Lawrence's gaze did not leave her hands. "Tell me," he said, "do they wind you up before you come out, or do you run on compliments alone?" He tilted his head, the smile not reaching his eyes. A clockwork waitress with a painted smile. Evelyn set the bottle's heel back on the linen and answered with the only shield allowed to her. "Is there anything else for your table, sir?" Clara's laugh spilled like a handful of glass beads. "She talks too, how darling. Maybe she sings," Troy offered. "Or recites the specials in iambic pentameter," Damien said, pleased with himself. Evelyn smoothed a corner of the napkin that had folded against the bottle. The name Kane still hovered like a bitter aftertaste from the last table where she had heard it, but she would not let it show. Margaret's voice lived just behind her shoulder. Be invisible, be efficient, be polite. She gathered her tray. "Don't hurry off," Lawrence said, not unkindly in tone, though something colder sat beneath it. "I want to be sure we're properly attended. Donate a little and the service improves. Donate a lot, and it smiles on command." "Lawrence," Clara purred, pretending to scold while angling her glass for the light. "You'll frighten her." "Do I?" He leaned back, considering Evelyn the way a gallery patron considers a painting he does not intend to buy. "No need to be frightened. We're simply making conversation. We're very supportive of the arts, aren't we?" He turned to his friends without waiting for an answer. "Patrons, all of us." Steen Damien lifted his flute. "To culture." "Peacefully, to entertainment," Troy amended. "A job well done," Clara said, eyes on Evelyn's face, as if searching for a crack.
She moved to go. His remark had the weight of someone accustomed to summoning people the way others summon elevators. At the edge of her vision, the chandelier sparks blurred. She fixed on the smaller truths of her work, the tray light in her palm, the bottle's cool neck, the step that avoids a hem trailing too long behind a chair. "Your manager trains you well," Clara said into the space Evelyn left. "So calm, like a nurse in a storm." "Or a mannequin that's learned to walk," Troy said. Damien snorted into his champagne. Lawrence's smile sharpened. "You're all missing the sport of it. Look how careful she is. Not a drop on the cloth. You could set a watch by that pour."
He turned the stem of his glass slowly, watching the bubbles climb. Precision has its own beauty, but it's dull without risk. Clara toyed with the edge of her napkin. What sort of risk? "The kind that wakes up a room." Lawrence glanced toward the band. The trumpet bent a note that sounded almost like a question. Around them, talk rose and fell. Knives chimed softly against porcelain, the air warm with perfume and that faint, yeasty whisper of champagne. "After all," he said, "it's a charity gala. People are paying to feel something." Damien lifted a brow. "You're thinking of an auction lot?" "Not an object," Lawrence said, his eyes following Evelyn's slow path as she moved to another table. A moment. Clara's laughter returned, a bright, practiced cascade. "You're terrible." "Only imaginative." He watched Evelyn pause to slide a plate into alignment, the small act of order that made a table feel complete. The band shifted again, a drummer's brush giving the room a heartbeat. A gleam passed over his features, something like mischief colliding with entitlement. He rubbed his thumb along the glass stem as though polishing an idea until it shone. "Stay nearby," he had told her. He meant to give that instruction meaning. A fragment of melody caught in his ear, and with it came a notion that pleased him, the promise of entertainment, neatly wrapped as philanthropy, daring dressed up as culture. He leaned in toward Clara, that cold light still fixed on the woman in black and white, moving through the glow. "I think," he said, almost to himself, "I've just thought of something." Money hit the linen like a bright noose, a loop of crisp bills thrown down to tighten around the quiet of the room. Conversation thinned. Forks hovered in midair. The band, sensing a shift it hadn't been hired to score, softened to a murmuring line of piano and brushes. Champagne, in tall flutes, kept its tiny ladder of bubbles, but no one lifted a glass. Lawrence Kane Jr. had produced the stack with theatrical ease, sliding it from a heavy clip that gleamed beneath the chandelier. It wasn't generosity. It was a spotlight in paper form. He fanned the bills once, letting the sound carry farther than it should, then placed them in the center of his table as if crowning a game he alone understood. 10,000, he said, his voice at the comfortable volume of a man used to being heard. "For a song, right here, right now." Around him, a ripple, shoulders turning, pearls catching light, the near-silent scrape of chairs. The nearby guests faced inward like petals closing around a bee. Across the floor, Evelyn had paused with her tray, her path to the service doors interrupted by his words. The number made something low in her chest thud. 10,000 was more than a figure in a bank account. It was months of medicine for her mother, the kind ordered in small bottles that seemed always to run out too soon. It was a worry taken off the nightstand and returned to the doctor's desk. It was silence where anxiety had been humming for years. Lawrence looked straight at her, as if he'd summoned her for this purpose. "You carry yourself like someone who could do more than pour," he added, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. "Let's give these donors a moment to remember." Spread outward in rings. The bandleader glanced toward the house manager, uncertain. A server at a far table froze with a plate of roast beef hovering just above the cloth. Someone stifled a laugh that came out wrong, breathy and curious. Serco stood still, the tray balanced easily in her hand. She had done this movement so long it lived in her bones. Behind her ribs, however, a different memory rose. A kitchen that steamed gently in winter, her mother humming while stirring a pot. the simple lift and fall of an old hymn that had traveled down through generations without sheet music, flour dust on the counter, the small, careful way her mother tapped a spoon against the rim to savor the taste and declare it right. That was the first audience Evelyn had ever known, one woman in a worn cardigan, smiling at a daughter's voice while the oven clicked and settled. "I'm sure you know something," Lawrence went on, an easy smile placed like a cufflink. "A chorus, a lullaby, anything will do. The point is to entertain, and to be rewarded." He tapped the money lightly with one finger. 10,000 for one song." Grilly looked from the stack to her, then back again, as if measuring what certain people cost. That was the part that stung. Not only the dare, but the arithmetic of it. She set her tray down on a vacant service stand, palms free now, fingers tingling with nerves that arrived late and all at once. She was aware of how small she must seem in black and white against the bright room. Someone at another table whispered, "Is this part of the program?" Another voice answered, "It is now." The quiet that followed, Evelyn could hear her own breath. The music in the corner turned to a hush of cymbals, like rain in the next block. She thought of the tuition she had once paid by cleaning practice rooms after hours, of leaving the music school when the bills at home began to stack like unsorted mail. She thought of watching her mother sleep, lips pale from fatigue, the pill organizer open like a 7-day calendar no one wanted to read. $10,000 would move a mountain that had been sitting stubbornly in their living room for years. But there was more than need at stake. There was the knowledge of why he asked. The dare did not come from respect for song. It came from certainty that money could command any moment, and from the expectation that the room would enjoy watching it do so. He was not offering a stage. He was offering a test to be watched and judged, and most of all, to amuse. A path seemed to open inside her, a narrow one, edged with thorns, leading between hunger and dignity. She remembered the way sound felt in her chest when a note found its true center, how the room shifted when sincerity filled it. She remembered the first time her choir director had closed his eyes while she sang, not from fatigue, but from trust. She remembered her mother setting down a wooden spoon and saying softly, "Sing it straight, Evie, don't decorate the truth." Reseber waited. Someone coughed. Lawrence rested his elbow on the back of his chair, pleased with the silence he owned. "No one will mind," he said, as if permission were his to give. "It's only a few minutes. Only a few minutes. Only a small price. Only, always only, when those minutes and that price belong to someone else's life." Evelyn looked at the money, then at the faces behind it. In them she saw curiosity, appetite, the bland benevolence of patrons who liked to feel that they had witnessed something rare without risking anything themselves. She let the sight pass through her as if it were weather. The memory of the kitchen steadied her more than any applause could. Butter melting on toast, her mother humming the low part, letting her take the melody. A voice is a home you carry, she thought. It was the one thing she hadn't pawned. She lifted her chin a little. The bandleader, catching the movement, raised his eyebrows in question. She did not nod. Not yet. First, there was the matter of deciding why she would do anything at all, for medicine, for survival, or for something that could not be printed on paper. Fastball arranged itself inside her like a chord resolving. She drew a breath that reached all the way down, the kind singers take before trusting the note to hold. The room leaned in, chairs quieting, glass stems chiming once and going still, as Evelyn Hart prepared to speak. She set the tray on the nearest service stand, hands trembling the way wrists tremble when a weight is finally put down. The sound of metal meeting wood was small, but in the hush that had settled over the hall, it traveled farther than it should. Evelyn slid the folded bar towel off the tray, smoothed it once, and began to untie the apron's long strings. The knot had learned her fingers years ago. It gave with a soft sigh. She folded the apron in halves, then quarters, the way her mother folded dishcloths at the end of an ordinary day, and laid it beside the tray as if returning something borrowed. Commissioner's Daughters was already moving toward her from the service doors, worry written across her face. She did not call out. She knew how sound carried, but her mouth formed Evelyn's name. When she reached her, she touched her elbow lightly. "You don't have to," she whispered, careful and steady, a kindness wrapped in instruction. Evelyn turned her palm up under Margaret's fingers in a brief, reassuring squeeze. "It's all right," she said softly. "Let me do this." There was no bravado in it, only a quiet choice. She bent and slipped out of her black flats, easing her heels free, then her toes. Stocking feet found the polished oak beneath the linen-draped tables. The floor was warm from the press of bodies, faintly springy under the finish, boards breathing in centuries of footsteps. She felt how the wood returned a touch of each step back to her, how it steadied the breath. Barefoot, she stood taller. The uniform remained, but it had lost the power to hide her. Around them, the gala gathered itself. Chairs turned, fans of programs stilled in midair. Champagne kept its soft fizz like distant rain. The band at the far end had fallen almost silent, the pianist holding a dim chord with the left hand, the right hand idle. The trumpeter lowered his horn. The drummer's brush circled the snare, then rested. Evelyn lifted her eyes toward the musicians and, with a small nod that asked rather than claimed, stepped from the safety of the service lane into open space. Light found her immediately. A wash of amber from the ceiling fixtures warmed the white of her blouse and put a sheen on the dark fabric at her hips. It painted her skin the color of late afternoon, a forgiving light that belonged more to memory than to a hotel. With silver at his temples and a kindness about the corners of his eyes, understood at once. He signaled to the sound tech, who hurried a microphone forward. It was an old style, heavy in the hand, with a round grill of dull nickel and a cloth-wrapped cable that fed into a black stand. The tech bent the stand lower, then lower still, until it matched her height. He lifted his hand away as if setting a fragile instrument on a shelf. Evelyn placed her fingers on the stand to feel the cool metal and the slight roughness where the paint had chipped. She did not test it or tap it. She only breathed. The hall answered that breath by growing even quieter, the way a congregation quiets when a hymn is about to begin. She remembered the hum of her mother's voice in their small kitchen. A line of melody slipped into the sizzle of onions, the words simple and old. Comfort carried on steam, faith carried on tune. Those memories stood with her now, solid as people. Reclined in his chair at the center table, smiling as if he had arranged the whole room. The crisp bills lay in a neat stack before him, a small green island in a sea of white linen. He seemed to think he had purchased this silence. Evelyn did not look his way. She did not look at any of them, though she felt their eyes, hundreds of them, like moth wings against a window. She let her gaze slip instead to the seam where two boards met beneath her feet, and then lifted it to the middle distance where light and shadow braided together above the crowd. Margaret lingered just beyond the light, hands clasped without realizing it, lips moving with a wordless prayer for grace. She had seen so many evenings in halls like this, and yet never one that balanced so much on so small an edge. The pianist raised his hand an inch off the keys in question. She met his eyes and gave the quietest shake of her head, no accompaniment, not yet. The song had to start as truth starts, without ornament. The band leader nodded and the musicians went still as furniture, present but unobtrusive, guardians at the edge of a moment that did not belong to them. Evelyn shifted her weight to the balls of her feet. The floor told her where her center was. She rolled her shoulders back the way her old choir director had taught, so the breath would have room. She set her jaw loose, tongue light behind her teeth, and let the next inhalation move lower than conversation ever needs. Her hands, empty for once, hung at her sides, relaxed, not posed. She let the hush soak into her skin until it felt less like pressure and more like permission. Stabilize of the pill organizer on her mother's table, of the way the compartments clicked shut for each day as if sealing away a little hope with each dose. She thought of the envelope tucked in the kitchen drawer with bills and past due notices, the corners softened from being handled too much. She thought of the way her mother would tilt her head when a tune found its pitch, eyes going soft in approval. The thought did not weigh her down. It steadied her like a hand between the shoulder blades. Somewhere near the doors, a coat check tag fell to the floor with a tiny plastic tick. No one moved to pick it up. The chandeliers hummed faintly. The room held itself like a breath held for luck. Evelyn leaned toward the microphone, and for a heartbeat, the glass and gold world seemed to lean with her. Her lips parted. In the warm amber light, on bare feet that knew the grain of the wood, she let the breath she had drawn gather into sound. Fingered, and the first note rose. A voice is not just sound, it is memory returning to where it first learned to breathe. The note that left Evelyn's mouth was small at the start, an ember cupped in two hands. It brightened as it traveled, warming the air between the tables, slipping past crystal stems and silver knives, carrying the kitchen where she'd grown up, the hum of a pot on the stove, her mother's soft harmony, into a ballroom built to forget such rooms existed. Field she didn't rush. The old microphone gathered her timbre and gave it back with a faint velvet grain, as if the past were gently stitched to the present. She sang a line the way a person tells a truth, plain, unforced, sure of its shape. The pianist, reading her breath, offered only a lamp of sound, soft chords that rose and settled like the breathing of a sleeping house. A beat later, the bass entered, wood and string saying yes in a low voice. The drummer's brushes brushed, no more than a whisper, putting a heartbeat beneath hers. It was a ballad the older guests knew in their bones, though no title was spoken. The kind that once spilled from jukeboxes and living room radios when the night grew tender. A woman at the nearest table touched her necklace and forgot to lift her glass. At the far side of the room, a retired teacher heard the gymnasium floor of a long-ago winter formal, paper stars taped to the rafters, his hand on a girl's shoulder, his breath held at the miracle of being allowed to sway. A widower in a neat navy suit felt his throat tighten at the vowel in a single word. It matched a note his wife had loved to hum while folding towels. Youth, it seemed, had been waiting behind the coat check, and now it slipped back in, smiling at its old seat. He did not look at anyone. She sang to the place just above the crowd where light gathered and softened, and her phrasing lengthened as if she were walking down a familiar street at dusk. The room's perfumes and bright laughter thinned into something quieter, like steam drifting from a kettle after it has been taken off the flame. She shaped the syllables with care, letting consonants land gently so nothing jarred. When a line called for a rise, she climbed, and when it wanted to fall, she let gravity do the dignified work. The song began to knit the guests together in the way old hymns do, making strangers keep time with the same breath without telling them to. At the center table, Lawrence Kane Jr. sat slightly forward, elbow on chair back, smile tilted for display. The stack of bills lay exactly where he had placed it, neat, undeniable, green as a traffic light. Yet his expression flickered the way a light does when a building draws more current than expected. He had imagined a party trick. He had gotten a room choosing silence over him. He reached for his champagne and found it heavier than before. Clara Vance, who had practiced laughter until it sounded natural, forgot her line and let the corner of her napkin rest untroubled on the cloth. Troy and Damien exchanged the quick glance men share when a game changes rules without warning. The band heard what the room heard, and settled the pianist let the left hand hold a lantern note while the right hand traced a simple ribbon. The bass walked with soft shoes. The brushes made snowfall. Evelyn's voice found the note that anchors such songs, a center pitch that feels like home to anyone who's ever needed one. She let it bloom, then drew it back, the way a mother might open a door to call a child in, and then close it gently so the house keeps its warmth. And then, without warning, she leaned into a phrase and colored it with the slightest ache, a tone she must have learned in church when sadness and hope take turns carrying the melody. The older guests felt that color and remembered a radio on a back porch, a slow dance at the end of a wedding when shoes were already off, a promise made without grand speeches. Someone's eyes prickled, someone's fingers found a spouse's hand, and the hand answered with a squeeze that meant, "We were young once too." He set his glass down with care, wary of the sound it might make. Control was a suit he wore easily. Now it pinched at the shoulders. He had intended to own the moment by funding it. Instead, the moment had turned and owned him by not asking his permission. He considered a quip, a small sound to remind the room who had started this. The thought died before it reached his tongue. No one was looking his way. The bills on the linen had grown oddly small, the way a bridge looks when you've already crossed it. Evelyn moved into the bridge of the song and let the lyric breathe. The band stepped back another inch, giving her the room a singer needs when the heart of the tune opens. She didn't decorate the line. She didn't need to. She sang it straight, as her mother had told her to do at the stove on those evenings when spices and melody mixed in the same air. The microphone warmed under her palm. The wood floor sent her weight back to her, keeping her centered. Her voice widened and thinned in the right places, a ribbon pulled through the eye of a needle and coming out whole on the other side. On the final chorus, she softened. Notes arrived like footprints in fresh snow, close together, careful. The pianist let a single high chord hang, china on a shelf, and the drummer drew a last circle with the brush, closing the figure he had been patiently making since the first bar. Evelyn gave the last vowel a home and released it, not with a flourish, but with trust, confident that the room would catch it. Silence followed, the good kind, the kind that tells you the sound went all the way in. A breath passed through the crowd, as if the ballroom itself were a chest that had been holding its air. At a table near the back, a pair of hands came together, once, clean, like a match struck in the dark. Another followed, then another, scattered sparks leaping from table to table. The quiet gathered itself for an answer, and the first wave of applause began to rise. Scorch pried the way summer sun browns a field in a single afternoon. It began as a scatter of hands, then gathered itself, found rhythm, and rose. Chairs pushed back, people stood. Somewhere a whistle tried to keep dignity and failed. Joy was louder. The spotlight found Evelyn and held there, a steady crown of warm gold, as if the room had decided to agree on one truth at last. She let the final breath ease from her chest and did not speak. The old microphone in her hand caught a faint ghost of the last note and returned it to the air, a soft ring that lingered above the clapping, as though the song were reluctant to step aside. Evelyn set the mic back onto the stand the way a person sets down a keepsake, carefully, with thanks. The cloth-wrapped cable made a small loop at her feet. The band, smiling without showing it, touched their instruments as if to say, "We were here too." Said lifted like pale flowers tilting toward light. Screens framed her from every angle. The arc of her shoulders, the shine on the wood beneath her stocking feet, the clear oval of her face under the amber wash. The first rows applauded with their smiles as much as their hands, those behind craned, trying to make a memory that would last longer than a video. Evelyn had been trained not to take up space. Now the room insisted she take it. Near the service doors, Margaret Doyle pressed a knuckle against her mouth. Tears surprised her and she let them come, the way one allows a small storm to pass over a field that needs it. For years she had told her staff to be invisible. Tonight one of them was being seen, not for a mistake but for a gift. She drew in a breath, sent a silent blessing across the light and straightened her jacket to keep from sobbing. At the edge of the central aisle, a photographer moved like a fish through clear water. Julian Cross carried his camera at chest height, lens open, shoulders relaxed the way experienced hands relax in crisis. He was not hunting drama so much as catching honesty at the exact moment it broke the surface. He clicked and clicked again. Evelyn in profile, eyes soft, mouth still parted from the note. The pianist's hand hovering above the keys like a prayer. Margaret's damp lashes, the chandelier dragging threads of light across the marble. Then he cut to the center table and framed a very different study. The neat stack of bills before Lawrence Kane Jr., the angle of a jaw clamped too long, a smile stiffening at the corners as if it had been pinned in place. The applause did not tire. It rolled forward in waves, then doubled back as if the room were testing how much gratitude it could hold. Older guests stood straighter, a warmth in their eyes that had nothing to do with wine. They had attended so many evenings like this that they could recite them in their sleep. This one had offered something unscripted. A retired piano teacher tapped time against her palm and remembered the students who found their tone late and were worth the wait. A barber from the Upper West Side felt his own shoulders loosen, thinking, that is what a voice sounds like when it's carrying home inside it. Evelyn bowed her head, not low, just enough to acknowledge what had happened between her and the room. She did not reach for the money. She did not even look at it. She folded her hands lightly and allowed herself a single second to feel stillness inside noise. The light was warm on her skin. For a breath, she forgot the uniform, forgot the tray waiting on the service stand, forgot the cupboards where pill bottles stood like little soldiers. There was only the ease of having said something true, out loud, and hearing the world answer back, "We heard you." Stabilize, meanwhile, heard something else, the sound of control slipping. He had expected the clapping to crest and fall on his timetable, to fold back into conversation he could steer. But the ovation ignored him. He shifted in his chair and adjusted his cuff as if polishing himself for the room would call attention home again. Clara Vance put a hand on his forearm in a gesture meant to soothe or to claim, even she wasn't sure which. Troy and Damien clapped with their eyes on him, ready to stop if he signaled, unsure and therefore late. Julian dipped his camera, then lifted it again, catching the precise moment Lawrence's expression changed from amused to irritated to something like alarm. The air had created a stage and been written out of the scene. That realization is a cold thing to swallow in front of an audience. He lifted his glass and found the stem slick with condensation. The applause swelled. He set the glass down as if it had betrayed him. Sing the Need for a Landing offered a gentle chord. It hung above the ovation like a porch light left on. Evelyn touched the mic stand once more, a small thanks, then stepped back a half pace toward the softer edge of light. The cameras followed. So did the applause. It would have been easy to curtsy, easy to wave. She did neither. She simply stood and received, which is sometimes harder than giving. Lawrence pushed his chair back. The scrape cut cleanly through the clapping, and for a heartbeat, only that, people hesitated. He rose, jacket falling into its line, the stack of money still in the center of the cloth. He looked at Evelyn, the way a man looks at a lock that will not open when the key is right there in his hand. His smile returned, but only to his teeth. Camouflage. "Well," he said, loud enough, "we've been entertained." He reached for the money. The bills were new. They snapped faintly under his grip. He lifted them, and for a second, anyone might have thought he planned the simple, gracious gesture. A neat handover, a bowed head, a compliment that would cost him nothing more than the cash he had already chosen to spend. Instead, a different impulse won. His wrist flicked. The green paper scattered into the air and fell in a messy halo at Evelyn's feet. Gasps broke like glass. The applause startled, stuttered, and died, the way rain stops when a door slams. A few phones kept filming out of reflex. Most lowered themselves, shamed by their own habit. The bills lay on the oak like leaves in a sudden wind, corners lifting and settling, edges winking in the light. To a person who had grown up saving coupons, it looked like a week's groceries torn and tossed. To a singer, it looked like someone shouting over the last note. Julian did not move closer. He did not need to. He raised the camera and took the picture he knew would carry the weight of the night. The woman in the light, the money at her feet, the man who had thrown it, framed by a room now unsure of him. Margaret took one step forward and stopped, hands halfway raised, as if she could catch falling paper and also catch the insult before it struck. Evelyn did not bend. She did not flinch. She looked down at the scattered green, at the way the edges overlapped like scales, at how easily value could be turned into a weapon of theater. The microphone sat on its stand behind her, still humming with the memory of her voice. She lifted her eyes from the floor, and the room held its breath to see what she would do. Stabilize cost more than any bill can buy. In those moments, dignity is the only tender that counts. The room understood this before anyone spoke. The green spill of money lay around Evelyn's feet, like leaves after a sudden wind. and the applause had fallen off a cliff into a silence so clear it carried the smallest sounds. The clink of a forgotten fork, the soft shift of a silk dress, the breath someone held too long and let go. Commentario stayed up, faces tilted toward the light where she stood. The microphone beside her kept its quiet place on the stand, a silver witness. Evelyn looked at the bills, neat and new, and then passed them to the faces that had watched them fly. She felt the old practical math rise: rent, groceries, refills of small bottles sorted into a plastic tray on her mother's table. 10,000 would carry a household for a while. It would close a handful of open doors that let worry in. But under that arithmetic was a memory strong enough to hold the room steady. Her mother at the stove on an ordinary evening, stirring sauce with a wooden spoon, humming the low part of a hymn while steam fogged the window. "Don't sell your song, Evie," she had said once, as if handing down a recipe. "Sing it straight and let it feed who it should." The words came back now without effort, as true and simple as warmth. Evelyn raised her head. She did not bend. She did not gather even a single bill. When she spoke, her voice carried the calm that follows a hard choice already made. "I don't sing for money," she said. Nigh the sentence moved outward like a clean bell. It crossed the tablecloths and the wine glasses and the careful centerpieces. It passed over the heads that turned to follow it and touched the chandelier's hanging crystals on its way toward the high ceiling. A few people blinked, as if something bright had entered their eyes. Others felt a quick sting of shame for having reached for their phones first. In the second after the words landed, you could almost hear thoughts rearrange themselves. Lawrence Kane, Jr. sat very still. The smile he preferred, easy, owning, had nowhere to settle. The room, which had obeyed his throw like a cue, was no longer taking direction. He opened his mouth to say something smooth, then closed it when nothing fit. The money, which had seemed like a lever, now looked like a mess he would have to step through. Evelyn did not look at him. She turned a little toward the band, toward the men who had understood how to leave space and how to offer it back. She touched the microphone stand with her fingertips, not to hold it, only to thank it. Then she let her hand fall. "Thank you," she added, softer, to the room that had met her song with more than curiosity. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a sound rose at the edge of the crowd, a chair leg gently pushed in, the rustle of a jacket as someone stood to make way. The path to the service doors opened itself the way water parts for something that knows where it is going. Evelyn stepped once, twice, careful of the scattered bills, careful of the cable curled at the base of the stand. Barefoot on wood, she felt the floor return each step to her, as if the building approved. Margaret Doyle, hands clasped at her waist, watched with wet eyes and the proud, helpless ache of a person who realizes that guarding someone sometimes means letting them walk alone. She did not try to pull Evelyn back. She did not need to. The choice was the whole story. Nigh someone near the center table whispered, "She's leaving it." Another answered, "She should." The older guests, people who had danced to this kind of song when it was new, nodded without thinking, recognizing the plain courage of saying no to an easy yes. A few of them began to clap again, not the roar from before, but something steadier and more human, like neighbors on a porch after a storm has passed. Lawrence found his voice late and brittle. "You're welcome," he tried, as if generosity had just occurred. The line sounded small in the tall room. No one turned to collect it. Evelyn reached the edge of the light. In the softer glow there, the uniform looked again like what it was. Work clothes, clean and meant for service. But her face had changed. It wore the open, rested look of someone who has set a heavy thing down and left it where it fell. She did not hurry. She did not look back. Past the last table, past a cluster of people who parted like a curtain, she moved toward the service doors that had always been hers, and for this one night had also been her wings. Her words kept working behind her. "I don't sing for money." They went on speaking in the quiet they'd made, folding themselves into memory beside the melody that had carried them. They pressed down the petty shape of the dare until it lay flat and harmless, like paper after flame. The edge of the central aisle, A man lifted a camera from his eye and lowered it to his chest. Julian Cross had been photographing a performance. Now he understood he had captured a decision. Light from the chandelier slid across his lens and stayed there a moment. He looked at the bills, at the path she took through them, at the faces that would tell this story at breakfast tomorrow and for years after. Then he glanced toward the doors Evelyn had just slipped through, and a brightness kindled in his gaze, the quick, certain light of a headline coming into focus. A single photograph can loosen the screws on a throne. Julian Cross knew that without needing anyone to tell him. He stepped out through the service corridor into the night and let the cool New York air rinse the heat of the ballroom from his face. Steam rose from a grate and drifted sideways. A taxi idled at the curb, horn giving a short, impatient cough. Somewhere down the block, a saxophone worked a late tune, thin and stubborn as thread. Voices spilled from the front steps of the Grand Aurora, guests repeating the story already, softer and more breathless with each retelling. Evelyn came out a different door, in the shadow of the loading bay where deliveries arrived by morning. She carried her shoes in one hand and the folded apron in the other. For a moment, she only stood there, shoulders releasing an inch at a time, as if the night itself were a cool cloth laid across her forehead. Julian did not approach right away. He watched the way she leaned back against brick and looked up at nothing, the way people do when they have said the plainest truth they own and must live with the echo. He checked his camera. The back screen lit his face faintly blue. Thumbnails marched in neat rows, faces half-turned, hands mid-clap, the glitter of glass, a cascade of bills caught in the air. He moved slowly through the frames, a careful fisherman choosing which nets to mend first. There were many good pictures. He needed 3 that together told what words would only crowd. The first was pure declaration. Lawrence Kane, Jr., fanning money as if air could be made from paper. That little smile that said the room belonged to him. You could see Clara Vance's profile in the corner, amused and admiring, a perfect invitation to the game. The second held its breath better than sound ever could. Evelyn under the amber wash, barefoot, mouth open on a note the camera could not record, but somehow carried anyway. The old microphone, the curve of the piano lid, the turned heads, a room choosing to listen. The third framed the moment no one would forget. Bills at her feet like green leaves after a sudden wind. Lawrence's face tightened into something sharp, and Evelyn looking not down but ahead, the light making a clean path across her cheekbone. The story, end to end, fit in that sequence. Arrogance, art, answer. He flagged them. Then he flagged 2 more angles in case an editor wanted options. A tighter crop on Lawrence's hand in motion. A wide shot that showed the center table like a small island of money in a larger sea of linen. He resisted the urge to overwork the set. The best photographs finish their own sentences. On the sidewalk, 2 guests in tuxedos rehearsed the details for each other. "She didn't take $1, one said. "The nerve," the other answered, and could not say if he meant hers or his. Julian closed the camera and finally crossed to Evelyn. He kept his voice ordinary. "Ms. Hart?" She looked over, guarded at first, then steady. "Yes?" "I'm Julian Cross. I was the photographer inside." He lifted the camera an inch as proof, then lowered it again so it would not sit between them like an accusation. "You were—" "That was the kind of moment a room only gets once." Evelyn nodded, not agreeing or disagreeing with his adjective. "It needed saying." He said, "Strong ones. I'd like to send them with a report tonight." He paused. "I won't use your address or private details. Just your name, if you allow it, and what everyone in there witnessed." She considered, eyes going distant for a breath as if consulting a quieter judge. "Use my name," she said. "It isn't the secret part." "Thank you." He offered a card. She slipped it into the pocket of her jacket. "If anyone calls you, it will be my editor. She's fair." He meant it. He also knew fairness is a promise one can only try to keep. A gust off the avenue carried the smell of street pretzels and rain that hadn't fallen yet. Tires hissed, a bus sighed to a stop. Far off, laughter lifted from a doorway and fell again. The city had the feeling it gets between midnight and morning, when the night is tired of itself and the day has not claimed the sky. Julian ducked back inside to find a stable signal. In a quiet corner near the coat check, he opened his laptop on a narrow table, tethered his phone, and pulled the files. He named the set simply, Gala, Singer, Money. In the subject line of the email to his editor, he put what he would have wanted to read if he were on the other end. Air throws cash. Waitress sings. Crowd turns. In the body, he wrote tight, no adjectives that asked the reader to feel, just the scaffolding that let the photographs do the work. Venue, charity, the dare, the amount, the song without its title, the throw, the refusal. He added 2 lines that mattered to him more than the rest. She said she doesn't sing for money. She walked away from it on the floor. 3 anchors and the 2 alternates. Pasted a low-res contact sheet for quick scan and hovered a second over the send button. Not for doubt, but for the small superstition all reporters keep, as if a breath could steady the path of a message through the unseen air. Hit send. No sound, the progress bar slid right and went still. On the other coast, or 10 blocks away, it didn't matter where, the newsroom would light up someone's screen. He texted his editor a single line, "Check inbox, now." 3 dots appeared and vanished. Got it, running. The reply came like a match struck in a dark room. Julian packed the laptop and camera, then stepped back onto the sidewalk. The saxophone had stopped. Taxis moved in brief yellow streaks. He looked up at the high windows of the ballroom where the chandeliers still burned, untired. In the loading bay shadow, Evelyn had gone, leaving only the square mark on the dust where her apron had been folded. He pictured her kitchen, though he had never seen it. A pill organizer, a wooden spoon, a window without a view, but with light. He started walking, letting the city set his pace. Somewhere a delivery truck downshifted and a deli closed a gate with a rattling finality that always sounds like bedtime in this town. By the time he reached the corner, he knew the headline would not need his help. It would write itself in the mouths of 100 people at breakfast. Morning came the way it always does, quiet at first and then busy. Before the light reached the floorboards of Evelyn's small place in Brooklyn, before the kettle on her stove had time to whisper, her phone began to buzz across the nightstand. Once, twice, and then again, a steady tremor like a second heartbeat calling her name. Morning light slipped through the old window and found everything where it had always been. The narrow stove with its enamel chipped at the corners, the little table with 2 chairs, the pill organizer lined up like a weekly calendar. Dust hung in the beam like slow snow. Evelyn set water to boil and stood barefoot on the cool floorboards, letting the quiet of her place in Brooklyn steady her before the day could speak. Her mother sat at the table in a soft cardigan, glasses low on her nose, humming without thinking, a church tune that had once kept time with a wooden spoon. "You were up late," Mrs. Hart said, gentle, curious, not prying. "Work went long," Evelyn answered, and the kettle whistled as if to agree. She poured coffee into a chipped blue mug and dropped 2 slices of bread in the toaster. The smell of it, toast, then butter, then coffee, made the kitchen feel braver. Her phone buzzed once, then again, then became a steady tremor on the counter. Messages stacked themselves faster than she could read them. A cousin she hadn't heard from in years sent a line with 3 exclamation points. A number with no name asked for comment. A link flashed to a home page where her face mid-song held the center like a candle. She put the phone face down and slid the mug to her mother. Mrs. Hart sipped, listening to the hum that lives in a big city morning. Trucks shifting gears. A radio 2 floors down. Footsteps in the hall. "Baby," she said, using the old word without apology. "Keep your head. People will want a piece of this. Your song is yours first. Don't let anyone pay you to change its heart." Forging nodded. The toaster popped. She buttered the slices and broke 1 in half for her mother, the old chair they'd always kept. A brisk knock sounded, then the door eased open without drama. "It's just me," Mrs. Romano called, warm as an oven. She came in with a paper-wrapped loaf and a grin. "I heard the news before my coffee finished. I brought bread, and I brought a story." Evelyn laughed in surprise and helped her set the loaf down. Mrs. Romano told them how, years ago, she'd sung alto in a neighborhood choir that met in a school basement. "We weren't much to see," she said, "but when we sang the old hymns, the janitor would stop and lean in the doorway. Some sounds make people stand still. That's what you did last night." She patted Evelyn's cheek like a blessing. "Don't forget where that sound came from." Jenner 1 began again. Ring, ring, then a pinging chorus of alerts. Someone buzzed the intercom. Another message insisted it was urgent. Evelyn silenced them all and took a breath. She looked at her mother. Mrs. Hart's eyes were calm. "Answer what you must," she said, "but not everything is must." A firmer knock came, 3 even taps, patient. Evelyn wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door. A man stood there with a camera bag over his shoulder and a card in his hand, the city's cool air still on his jacket. "Ms. Hart," he said, voice careful but bright with purpose, "Julian Cross, may I talk with you a minute?" Some doors open when you've already stacked the chairs and turned out the lights. That thought followed Evelyn up a narrow flight of steps in the theater district, past a brass plaque with faded letters, into a studio that smelled of floor polish, rosin, and old coffee. The walls carried framed black and white photos, chorus lines caught mid-kick, a director leaning over a score, a curtain call with faces glowing under footlights. A wooden piano sat near the windows, its top crowded with pencils, worn to stubs, and a metronome that looked older than the building. Julian eased the door shut behind them. "He's expecting us," he said, as if that were ordinary. "Be yourself." He didn't add, "It worked before." He didn't need to. A man in a dark sweater waited in the center of the room, compact and wiry, hair silvered in a way that suggested energy rather than age. His eyes were the sharp blue of winter sky. "Ms. Hart," he said without ceremony. "Martin Holloway." He offered his hand. His grip was dry and sure. "I heard about last night before the ice had melted in my glass. Then I saw the photographs. I prefer live to still, but the stills told enough." Flush Evelyn looked around the room again, letting it steady her. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. Her voice sounded quieter here than in the ballroom, but truer. Martin gestured to the piano. "This old thing knows more songs than I do. We'll keep it simple. I want to hear your instrument before anyone styles it." His mouth tipped in a quick smile. "Back when we ran that show in the late 80s, you'd have been a hope and a rumor. People said I liked big sound. They were wrong. I like honest sound. A trumpet in a hallway, a voice at a kitchen sink. Can you give me that?" "I can try," Evelyn said. Julian took a respectful place by the wall, camera bag at his feet, hands folded. He looked like a man keeping still in a church. Martin nodded toward the accompanist's bench. "No pianist today. I want to meet your pitch before you meet anyone else's." He stepped closer, not invading, just inhabiting the same square of air. "Take your time. A verse. No need for names or showpieces. Anything you own." Ewen stood on the worn boards and let her breath settle, the way she had in the hall. Through the window, the city moved in soft shapes, buses making their patient turns, a vendor pulling down a metal gate. She placed her palm on the piano's cool edge, not to lean, but to listen. A melody rose unbidden, one she had learned without sheet music. A simple contour you could hum while washing dishes or walking home in the dark. She sang. The first line was small and plain. The room caught it and gave it back. Martin's eyes narrowed in concentration, not doubt. He held up a single finger again. So she sang the line a second time, opening the vowel a hair wider, letting the tone sit lower in the chest. He nodded. "Good," he murmured. "You don't press." He moved to the side, hearing the sound from another angle. Continue. She let the melody move over a second phrase, then a third. No ornaments, just shape and breath and truth. The studio asked for nothing more, and that made the notes easier. Memories stood close but did not crowd. Her mother's kitchen, a choir riser, the hush in a grand hall becoming consent. The wood under her shoes felt steady. The window light turned the dust to slow sparks. Martin lifted his hand. Stop. Not abrupt, just exact. Silence held a beat, then another. He walked a slow half-circle around her, as if checking the frame of a door he meant to pass through often. Again, he said, but put a hand on your stomach. Feel the support. She did. Good. Now tell the line to a person in this room. Don't perform it to the wall. He pointed, not at himself, but at Julian. Commemorate. She turned her head and sang the phrase once more, speaking it with tone rather than speech. Julian's eyes softened. You could see the sound land. Martin exhaled through his nose, pleased. There it is. He glanced at the photos on the wall, then back to her. You're not copying, thank God. He let silence return and stay a little. The metronome on the piano ticked once as if remembering its job. People will try to gild you, he said quietly. They'll put a dress and a spotlight and 3 extra notes on everything you do. Learn to decline what isn't yours. Evelyn swallowed. I can learn. I know, he said. He took 2 steps back, giving her air again. The audition was already finished. She felt it the way you feel a door click shut behind you and to know you're in the right room at last. Julian tells me you walked off $10,000 on a floor because the moment demanded something cleaner, Martin said, tone even, almost conversational. That's not a stunt. That's a compass. He went to the piano and laid his hand on it, not playing, just connecting to the wood. I'm building something new, he said. A piece about how the past carries us whether or not we pack it. Echoes that follow and shape the day. I've heard 100 voices for the lead, good voices, fancy voices. None of them made me look up the way your plain line just did. He looked at her directly, the winter sky of his irises flashing with a warmth rare in that color. I don't want to test you in a hallway with a queue of 10 behind you. I'm beyond that. I want to work. Julian let out the breath he'd been holding. Martin straightened, decision plain on his face now. Not dramatic, simply done. Ms. Hart, he said, each word carefully placed. I'd like you to take the lead in my new musical. Music didn't just summon the sweet, it woke what hurt. In the quiet of the studio, with the metronome still and the city a gray hush beyond the windows, Evelyn told them why she'd left the conservatory. Her father had supplied materials to a waterfront build. Kane Corp found a clause, canceled late, and left his small company hollow. The calls from banks multiplied. Nights grew longer. Pride kept him upright until it didn't. After the funeral, tuition bills sat beside utility bills, and she boxed her scores and took shifts wherever tips came quickest. Mile listened without interrupting. Arms folded, eyes softened by something like grief. Julian stood near the piano, camera bag unopened, as if raising a lens now would be indecent. Evelyn's voice stayed even, but a single detail bent it. The memory of her father, in a kitchen chair, eyes closed, listening as she sang a hymn to test the kettle's whistle, tapping time with a spoon against his knee. So that, Martin said, almost to himself, is the key the song carries. Julian straightened, decision landing cleanly in his posture. This isn't just a gala story, he said. It's what was done to make that dare possible. He met Evelyn's gaze. The world needs to know this. A photo can outrun any fire. By mid-morning, Julian's article had claimed the front page of a major site, and the headline carried Evelyn's name beside the Kane dynasty. The lead image, her bare expression as she sang, $10,000 bills scattered at her feet, Lawrence Jr., frozen in anger, traveled across feeds faster than anyone could count. Within hours, hashtags rose and fused into a single chorus. Hashtag Voice of Justice. Evelyn scrolled in disbelief as comments poured in. A retired teacher wrote, "She reminds me of the choir girl who carried us through winters with her hymns." Another added, "Integrity sounds better than money ever will." Teenagers clipped the video into edits. Grandparents shared it with captions about dignity. News anchors debated her poise. Opinion pages framed her as the antidote to arrogance. For a moment, the city spoke her name as if it were a note sustained. In a high-rise office, though, the mood darkened. Lawrence Kane Sr. read the headline twice, jaw tight. Then he slammed the paper on his desk and barked the order, "Bring me my son." The press hall gleamed, with marble floor, "Bring me my son." The Waitress wrote in the spaces, "The family to Seville daughter in the state." However, all away, into 7 daughters. The city fruit a family stute, their guests did patient, ever use and lowered. Whatever, he'd heard for me the people up. What do you starts a system for me? We need a facist, the ease, the same. Whatever, we have them. So, we're new turning. Whatever, we need to act and have a dustant sane. In the model of heavens, he came mood for self. The greens Kane and could peat the video against. We all have disappoint. Whatever, we need to do. People once drum was in lowered. Voice of justice, to be here. Pain, today. You, spee. Pain, today. You, spee. To, spee. To, spee. To. Plus. Every day the video space, following or fullest on man, de science practices famous to later space. For a moment, the base to examines carria, wrote even to ever. A retired gleamed with marble floors and the wall of cameras that never blinked. Lawrence Kane Jr. stood at the podium in a tailored suit, clutching a sheet of paper that might as well have been shackles. He began to read, voice flat, the apology carefully crafted by lawyers.
"I deeply regret."
The words dripped like cold water, calculated but empty. Flashes burst in rapid succession, reporters crowding closer, pens poised. The more he spoke, the more hollow it sounded. A ripple of murmurs grew into sharp questions.
"Mr. Kane, do you feel any personal responsibility?"
Another called.
"Was the $10,000 dare a reflection of your values?"
His gaze never lifted from the page, his lips moving like a machine.
Then a voice cut through the clamor. "Is it true your company destroyed the Hart family business?"
The room froze for a heartbeat, then cameras fired like thunder. Lawrence Jr.'s hand trembled, the page slipped, his carefully rehearsed mask cracked. Without another word, he stepped back, eyes wide, and bolted from the stage. The echo of shutters followed him, sealing the humiliation in a storm of images. In a quiet corner of a Brooklyn cafe, the steam from 2 cups of coffee rose between Evelyn and Julian like a veil. She spoke slowly, tracing the rim of her mug, recounting the days when her father's small supply business thrived, until Kane Corp tore the contract away. She told of the unpaid loans, the foreclosure notices, and the weight that broke him. Her voice steadied only when her hand brushed the little silver cross her mother had given her, as if drawing strength from it. Julian listened without interruption, his pen racing, his recorder blinking red. The story he was shaping wasn't about a gala or a dare. It was about how arrogance at the top crushed lives below. When Evelyn finished, silence lingered, heavy yet freeing. Days later, his article, The Singer's Debt, splashed across front pages and dominated online feeds. It was part profile, part indictment, weaving Evelyn's voice with the documented trail of Kane Corp's ruthless tactics. Readers called it a reckoning. By nightfall, talk shows debated it, and by morning, word spread that federal regulators and the SEC had opened formal inquiries. The empire had been pierced, and the wound would not close easily. The boardroom atop Kane Tower buzzed with panic. Screens on the wall bled red arrows. Ticker lines showing Kane Corp stock plunging by the minute. Investors who once fought for seats now dialed in only to announce withdrawals. The news crawled across televisions in the lobby, Evelyn's photograph side by side with the words "Federal Inquiry." Lawrence Kane Sr. sat rigid at the head of the table, his jaw tight, while directors whispered about insolvency and reputational collapse. At the far end, Lawrence Jr. looked pale, hands clasped uselessly, as his phone vibrated with another message, Clara Vance's final statement ending their engagement, her tone icy and moral. The humiliation pressed down like a physical weight. Enough. Senior's fist crashed against the polished wood. Silence snapped across the room. For the first time, he admitted what they all knew. Control had slipped through his fingers. His empire, the fortress of decades, was crumbling from a single song carried by truth. Breathing hard, he leaned forward, eyes dark with rage. "This is not the end," he growled. "If I cannot break her in the market, I will find another way to destroy her." The velvet curtains lifted, and a single beam of golden light poured down, catching Evelyn's face as though the years of silence had only been a pause. The orchestra began softly, a ripple of strings swelling into the familiar overture of echoes of light. She stepped forward, every nerve alive, yet her voice emerged steady, rich, soaring, filling the Broadway hall like a prayer long deferred. The audience leaned in, drawn by the raw truth carried in her tone. Cell phones lowered, hands stilled. Some whispered her name as if confirming she was real. In the second row, Martin Holloway watched with a quiet pride, while in the middle section, her mother sat upright, her eyes shining, lips curving into the smile Evelyn had always carried in memory. The final note rose and lingered, trembling against the rafters until silence held it aloft. Then came the eruption. Cheers, applause, a standing ovation that thundered through the theater. Evelyn's tears broke free, streaking under the stage lights. She pressed a hand to her chest, bowed her head, and whispered, "I'm back." The curtain fell, and though shadows of the Kane family's threat lingered somewhere beyond those walls, Evelyn now stood wrapped in the brilliance of a public that had chosen to protect her light.